There are very few guitar players where within the first couple seconds of hearing them play, you're able to tell exactly who it is. Albert, BB, and Freddie King are all perfect examples of this. They each had their own unique style that helped to influence other guitarists that came after them. Albert with SRV, BB with John Mayer, and Freddie with Eric Clapton. Today, I want to talk about three main topics and go over each of them for all of the three kings. Those being tone and sound, phrasing and technique, and vocals. I'll be giving examples and breaking down their styles to show what makes them so cool. I'll also put links in the descriptions to all of the examples I give so that you guys can go and check them out for yourselves. Albert King, also known as the Velvet Bulldozer, was known for playing his iconic flying V that he named Lucy. He was left-handed, so he played a right-handed guitar upside down, kind of like Jimi Hendrix. Except Albert didn't restring the guitar, which meant that the thinnest strings were at the top and the thicker strings were at the bottom. I'll talk about how this affected his playing in the next topic. Albert also didn't use standard tuning, and the tuning that he actually used is still unknown to this day. But to play along with his records, you can tune down to E flat and you'll be just fine. As for his tone, he used an edge of breakup and sometimes overdriven sound. And towards the end of his career, he also used an MXR Phase 90. BB King, which, fun fact, stands for Blues Boy, was known for playing his Gibson ES-335 that he named Lucille. He has an album by that same name, and the first track off that album, he tells the story of how the name came to be. As for his tone, he always played pretty clean, and on the rare occasion was on the edge of breakup. Freddie King, also known as the Texas Cannonball, was known to play Gibson semi-hollow guitars, either a 335 or a 345. He also had a Gibson Gold Top Les Paul with P90 pickups. As for his tone, he was always on the edge of breakup and pretty gritty, really leaning into that Texas blues sound. As I previously mentioned, Albert played his guitar upside down, with the thinnest strings being at the top and the thicker strings at the bottom. This meant that to bend, all he had to do was pull the strings down instead of push them up. This, combined with his unorthodox tuning, helped him to do ridiculously big bends, sometimes even catching multiple strings during the bends, which I've heard described as train wreck style bends by Anthony from Texas Blues Alley. He also didn't use a pick and instead plucked the strings with his fingers. This helped him to get a bit of a snappy and twangy style sound, and also helped with his signature stinging vibrato. Oftentimes, during his solos, he would cue the whole band for breaks. I'll break down that idea and some of his other ideas in the next clip. Let's take a closer look at some of Albert King's phrasing. For this example, we'll be in the key of C, using the first and second positions of the minor pentatonic. Albert primarily played on the thinner strings, and his ideas would either move from box 1 into box 2, or from box 2 down to box 1. An example of the first one would be something like this. And an example of the second one would be something like this. As I mentioned before, Albert didn't play with a pick. Let's take a look at why that made a big difference in his sound. Here's an example of one of his licks being played with a pick. And now without a pick. There's a slight difference there, but it's definitely noticeable. Occasionally, Albert would end some of his licks on the thicker strings. An example of one of those licks would be something like this. Now let's take a look at some of those multi-string bends and big bends. When doing his multi-string bends, he would catch the high E string and the B string together, and he would do this primarily in box 2. An example of one of those licks would be something like this. And now let's take a look at one of his big bends. For this example, find your minor third on the B string. In this case, it's going to be on the 16th fret, and the lick goes something like this. Finally, let's take a look at one of my personal favorites, Albert's breaks. He would primarily call for breaks during a slow blues. In a slow blues, a typical progression is 1 bar of the 1 chord, followed by 1 bar of the 4 chord. However, when he would call for the breaks, all of the hits would be on the 1 chord. Let me give you an example of what he would play during this. Next up, BB King. BB King's phrasing was very vocal-like. In an interview, he was asked about this, where he said that he hears a line in his head before he plays it, almost singing it to himself. One aspect of his playing that really highlights this is his call and response, where he'll play a lick and end it on a note that wants to be resolved. And then in the next lick, he'll end on a note that resolves the first lick. You can hear a lot of this on his legendary album, Live at the Regal. And of course, we can't forget about his legendary vibrato. Baby had a cousin named Booker White who played slide guitar. He wanted to try and get a similar sound out of his guitar without using a slide, and thus, his legendary vibrato was born. Now let's take a closer look at some of BB's phrasing. For this example, we'll be in the key of A. We'll use the first position minor pentatonic, second position minor pentatonic, and the BB box, although we're going to mix in a couple of major notes as well. BB was a master at mixing both major and minor. He would start a lick using the minor pentatonic, but end it using one of the major notes. Here are two examples of that. In both of these examples, I ended on the major third, but sometimes he would end on the major six. Here's an example of that. And this leads into some of his call and response feel. Choosing to end on that note adds a little bit of tension. It feels unresolved. So after playing something like that, he might follow up with something like this. Choosing to end on the root note to give it a resolved feel. One cool thing he would do in the BB box is to take the 12th fret of the high E string and bend it up a step and a half. And bring it back down. He would do that a lot, and it would add a lot of tension to his solos. Here's an example of something he would do. He would also hit the root note on the high E string, sometimes sliding out of the note, and sometimes choosing to add vibrato to it. Trying to copy BB King's vibrato is really hard, but what I found helps me the most is to rotate my whole hand and think of it as shaking my wrist and not just my finger. Finally, Freddie King. Freddie also didn't use a pick. Instead, he opted for metal finger picks. This helped him to achieve a very bright but powerful tone. He was a very rhythmic player. With a lot of instrumental tracks in his discography, rhythm came first and lead came second. A great example of this is his song Hideaway, where you can hear him play a lead line and then go back to playing rhythm. He also changes to different shuffle patterns throughout the song, but never misses a beat. For the most part, his phrasing was pretty aggressive, whether he was playing on a slow blues, a blues rock tune like Going Down, or a ballad style tune. Let's take a closer look at Freddie King's playing style. I brought up the song Hideaway before and talked about how he was a rhythm first player, so let's take a look at that song. It starts off with a pickup. 4E and a 1 is how you would count it. And then he's able to go right into the shuffle without missing a beat. Throughout the song, he plays lead lines and goes right back to the shuffle. He also changes the shuffle pattern, and I'll show you some of those now. But perhaps the coolest part of the song is when he calls for breaks and he carries the rhythm himself. Again, he's able to drop right into the shuffle like it's nothing. But aside from his instrumental tracks, whenever he would go to solo, he would always take an aggressive approach. So let's take a look at some examples. For this, we'll be in the key of D, using the first and second position of the minor pentatonic. Freddie used to also like to mix major and minor, so here are some examples of that. In both examples, he uses the major third. Freddie also used a lot of pull-offs in his playing, so an example of a lick where he would do this would be something like this. He would often do that pull-off from the root to the flat 7 and from the 5 to the 4 to end his licks. Another habit Freddie had was to play between the minor third and the 4th, so he would do something like this. Or up here in the second position. Now I'll give you an example of his aggressive phrasing doing my best Freddie King impression. Finally, last but most certainly not least, their vocals. Vocals of all great guitar players are oftentimes overlooked because their playing steals the spotlight. However, Albert, BB, and Freddie were all excellent singers, but more than just that, they were all performers. Albert King's voice was very smooth. He had a wide vibrato and a deeper voice than the others, and perhaps maybe a bit less power. By this, I mean you'll never hear him belt the same way BB and Freddie do. He could sing the blues with the best of them, but he wasn't just confined to this. He could also just flat out sing, and he really showcased this on his cover of The Very Thought of You, off of his Born Under a Bad Sign album. For the most part, he doesn't really play guitar on the track, and he really lets his voice take center stage. But more than just being a singer or a guitar player, he was a performer. He could engage the crowd and really put on a show. One of the best examples of this is his performance of Blues Power from the Fillmore East in 1970. B.B. King's voice was very powerful. He could belt like there was no tomorrow, but he could also sing very softly and hit some pretty high notes. The way he was able to glide between notes and add his beautiful vibrato on top was impeccable, like a butterfly landing on a flower. If you listen to any of his live performances, you're sure to find great examples of both of these. But one song that really showcases both is Please Accept My Love from Live at Cook County Jail. Now, in terms of performing, he was one of the best. He would engage the crowd by telling quick little anecdotes in between songs, and he even acted out some of his songs. For example, on How Blue Can You Get, he would act out the line, I gave you a brand new Ford, but you said I want a Cadillac, even switching to a woman's voice for the I want a Cadillac line. Freddie King also had a very powerful voice, and he could also hit some pretty high notes. His vocal style, in my opinion, is the grittiest and rawest out of the three. When he lets loose on songs like Have You Ever Loved a Woman, this really shines through. But he too wasn't limited to just singing the blues. He could also sing ballads, and you can hear this on songs like Same Old Blues, and Please Send Me Someone to Love. As for his stage presence, he commanded the stage. The way he wore his guitar around his body, put his entire body into every note that he played, especially with his guitar face, and engaged the crowd by saying, if you can hear me say yeah, let me hear you say yeah, and are you listening? Whenever he stepped on stage, the Texas Cannonball was larger than life. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Let me know if you want me to make another video following up on any of the ideas that I shared today and going into more depth about them. Please like and subscribe, and let me know down in the comments what you want to see next. Thank you.